Thank you. I do not have slides tonight, so you just got me. So, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to provide insight into my moral compass that has guided me throughout my career and helped me maintain a solid personal and professional code of ethics. For most of my life, I have strived to follow the rules, constantly identifying the consequences and impact of poor choices before making a final decision. This internal compass has served me well throughout my personal life and career and is the tool that I use to gauge decisions today. As a leader, I understand that I am no longer responsible for just myself. My decisions impact my staff and the public I serve. As many of you already know, I am an elected official. Being elected into office comes with a different set of responsibilities that you must remind yourself of every day. Perception is everything. Every part of my job and decisions that I make somehow are based on ethics. From our readings and class discussions, I know that accountability among elected officials can be more challenging than individuals hired to do a job. Specific to my situation, I am an elected constitutional officer who answers directly to the people I serve. Although elected officials cannot be fired by the governing body for failure to perform their duties, they can be removed from their office every 4 years through the election process. As discussed in this class, there are pros and cons to this process because the buck stops with me in the decisions that I make for my office. Although county administrators, town managers, attorneys, and staff are public servants, they answer to the elected board of supervisors and council members. I, on the other hand, am also a public servant, but I answer directly to the people. Although this form of government has come into question several times during our class, the separation of duties is meant to prevent any outside influence from swaying a decision, in my case, on taxes. Believe it or not, the county board members in my locality are relieved by this separation when they have constituents requesting an exception on their taxes or waiving of penalty on a late payment. They let the citizen know that I do not work for them and they have to deal with me directly. The board members trust that I will follow my moral compass, my code of ethics, and the Code of Virginia when handling these situations. And I do. I am fortunate because my reputation that I have earned, this is my reputation that I have earned in my position. And I say earned because, as we've learned in some of our readings, we have to walk the talk. My reputation means the world to me. I would never do anything that would put that in jeopardy. When I say that I make no exceptions regardless of who you are, I mean no exceptions. Unfortunately, I've had to tell county employees, county administrators, board members, friends, and even my daughter's godfather that I cannot waive penalty for a late payment. Do I feel bad when I have to say no? Of course. But ethically, it is the right thing to do, so I stick to the rules. Could I treat people differently? Yes, but ethically, that is the wrong thing to do. And that's not who I am. In saying all of this, I should mention that if I can make an exception for a taxpayer that is allowable under the Code of Virginia, and I would do it for any other taxpayer, then I make an exception. I will always remain fair and consistent in that determination. Unlike many other elected positions, constitutional officers are working professionals tied to the duties carried out by their office. It is not a side job, it is a career. As long as you have an elected official who is constantly reminded of their sworn duty to uphold the Virginia Constitution and remain fair and consistent in their decision making, the public will be served with the highest level of integrity and professionalism. It is when they forget their role that they find themselves in hot water. As a leader, this is where an individual's morals and values come into play. Being committed to doing the right thing, staying focused on a code of ethics, following the rules and regulations, demonstrating leadership amongst staff, and maintaining the integrity of the office and position are characteristics of a strong leader. For years, I have had to make some tough decisions, but I signed up for this job and I understand the rules and guidelines that I have been given to follow, and that's how I proceed. The material we have covered in this class has offered new tools for evaluating decision-making processes to ensure that all perspectives are considered before making a final decision. Although I already know how to proceed, it is comforting that after going through the checklist, I arrive at the same conclusion, which gives me peace of mind that I am doing the right thing. That voice inside of me is my moral compass. It keeps me on track. In the book Ethics and Management in the Public Sector, Alan Lawson and others outline that what it takes to be a moral person and a moral manager. His illustration shows that they are entwined because you really cannot be a moral manager unless you are a moral person. I strongly believe in all the characteristics listed, such as integrity, honesty, trustworthiness, reliability, and moral courage. I strive to be the best that I can be, and I try to be a role model that emulates these traits. In our reading, I learned that your actions as a leader speak louder than words. Therefore, when deciding whether to waive the penalty or take disciplinary action, I am open with staff and explain the policy or regulation that has guided my determination. When applicable, I allow staff members to weigh in on the decision-making process so that they are constantly reminded that we all have to follow the rules, be mindful of the impact, and remain respectful, fair, and consistent with our citizens. In the Treasurer's Office, trust is so important because you manage all the money for the locality. So not only do you have to have a strong moral compass that radiates integrity, but you have to hire individuals with integrity to protect the trust. Although there are no guarantees that an employee will walk the path of righteousness, my job is to monitor and promote an ethical work environment by leading by example. Additionally, there is no guarantee that the individual applying for a position will rise to the same level of standards desired for employment. A leader must demonstrate a commitment to following the rules and explaining the purpose of such rules to set the bar for others to strive to achieve. Low expectations promote poor results, but high expectations gives professionalism meaning and becomes a reachable goal. Investing in staff through ongoing training and making them feel appreciated through accolades and a simple thank you energizes employees to do their best. Allowing employees to help set the team goals and rewarding them when the goals are met promotes a positive work environment, which leads to a strong work ethics and accountability amongst employees. Taking swift corrective action when the employees stray from following the rules or established code of ethics enforces the severity of such actions and the potential penalties for disregarding the rules. During this course, I have benefited from several reading assignments and case studies. One of the topics that I selected to write about in my midterm was the comparison of leadership styles and behaviors. After reviewing all the leadership styles, including transactional, transformational, entrepreneurial, and creative, I found that a sprinkle of all of these styles provides the greatest benefit. Being well-rounded makes you a strong leader. While all 4 leadership styles are effective, none are complete without incorporating ethical leadership. It is the anchor that keeps the organization honorable. Another topic I selected for my midterm was deontological theory versus consequentialist theory. Often the daily activities in a public office can force leaders to make decisions with minimal information that require them to go into their internal instincts, relying on their personal morals and values. When making such determinations, the leader must ask whether the consequences of the decision need to be considered. Although the easy decision usually looks at what has the most significant impact on the majority, I have learned that sometimes the decision must be based on what is right, even if it only benefits a smaller number of people. In the ethics case analysis assignment, I selected Advancing Racial Equity in the Minneapolis Park System, which offered insight into why decisions should not always be based on the greatest happiness for the greatest number, and understanding that there are times when the cost does not fit into the equation. I wanted to finish my presentation with a couple of highlights from my first assignment, Code of Ethics from the Treasurers across the Commonwealth, because it captures what I believe to be the true meaning behind being an elected official driven by ethics and taking the oath. On December 13, 2023, I will take my fourth oath, swearing that I, Tanya Remsen Wilcox, will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I will discharge all the duties incumbent faithfully and impartially upon me as treasurer according to the best of my ability, so help me God. I do not take this oath lightly, nor do I take the privilege to serve the constituents in my community for granted. As elected officials, treasurers across the Commonwealth of Virginia are bound by a strict code of ethics through the state laws and professional associations. As with many organizations, a standard set of professional ethics exists. However, the treasurer also falls under strict guidelines to ensure that public funds are secure and managed within the confines of the state law. The Virginia Conflict of Interest and Ethics Advisory Committee Council monitors these regulations closely, as do the Virginia Auditors of Public Accounts and the external auditors hired to inspect the process and test for compliance. The elected official is required to complete a conflict of interest form annually, disclosing all assets, debts, and financial interests that they have that may influence the way they conduct business in the office. The Ethics in Government Act of 1978 and the Virginia Conflict of Interest Act of 2014 were also established to prevent elected officials from engaging in nefarious acts. Within the Treasurer Association organization, mandatory classes are required for each treasurer and staff to reach certification, which includes ethics. The association also conducts an annual review of professional ethics that the treasurer must attest to for the office to receive acknowledgement of compliance. These policies continuously remind the elected treasurer of the importance of remaining faithful to the duties assigned to the official sworn into office. By implementing and enforcing the professional code of ethics established by the Treasurers Association within each office, the public is better served and the overall performance is improved. Simply stated, the Ethics of the Government Act of 1978, the Conflict of Interest Act of 2014, and the Treasurers Association Professional Code of Ethics are all meant to build confidence in public officials and trust in government. In closing, this course was an excellent opportunity to review and reaffirm my moral compass. The readings and discussions were engaging and applicable to any work environment. It cannot be overstated that a person's integrity is defined by their morals and values. What I have found in my career is that most people will trust you until you give them a reason not to trust you. But once you have violated that trust, it is hard to regain. Thank you again for allowing me to share my personal ethics statement.
Let's give Tanya a round of applause. Thank you so much, Tanya. This was fascinating. I was scribbling furiously to take notes because I found so many points that you were talking about really, really interesting, and I didn't want to miss anything. I've got a question first, and then I want to open it up to the class.
Okay.
I noted, and I'm going to couch the question a little bit. I noticed you talking, using terms like equality, equity, and ethics, and they were very, very connected in your view of the world, right? We often see that meme where equality is different from equity, with the people standing on the stools in front of the fence, right? And they're at different heights. And equality is everybody has the same height of stool. Equity is that everybody has a stool high enough to let them look over the fence, right? And with your job, it would seem these are more closely related, right? An equitable solution is often an equal solution too, right?
Okay.
And an ethical solution, right? They're not synonymous, but the end result would seem to fulfill all three of those types of categories of analysis, right? And I was equal with my decision making. I also thought about equity, and it was satisfied, and also ethical. right?
Mhm.
And it can fulfill all three of those. So my question for you
Mhm.
is about the field in which you inhabit, that is a lot about fiduciary responsibility, right?
Mhm.
And that would seem to me, in my mind, to be very much related to black and white numbers, right? So
It
you're calculating black and white numbers for the purposes of assessment and for making sure everybody's bill's correct and charging everybody what they should be charged in that fashion. And my question is is that sort of mindset, is that sort of fiduciary responsibility connected to really close following of policy and less discretion when it comes to ethics?
Well, accounting is about numbers, and Helen's on, so I'll just throw this out there. Attorneys can see gray because they're trying to persuade people to see things the way that they wanted them to see, in court or whatever the case may be. But with accounting, numbers are numbers, and so for me, the rules are in place for me to follow, and I don't have much discretion. I mean, even like when I talk about waiving penalty or something, there are two things within the code that allow me to waive penalty. If I can make it fit into those two, then I will, because I want to help people if I can, obviously. But if they do not fit in there, it is black and white. There is no gray. And so that's the discussion when I tell you that my board members love, love, love to be able to say, you got to talk to the treasurer. I can't help you. She's the one who has the final call. They love it because they know that I won't deviate, and it takes them out of the hot seat, right? Yeah.
It
So,
becomes apolitical, right?
mhm,
It becomes
mhm.
apolitical at that point because it's about what's on the page and following the rules,
And
right?
I will tell you this, when you're elected into an office like this, at least this is the way that I accept this position. When I walk through the threshold, I'm everybody's treasurer. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what political affiliation you have. None of that matters at the point in which I walk into this office, because I'm everyone's treasurer. Yeah. But I'm telling you, you could ask anyone that has ever met me that my integrity is is so important to me. And when I say perception is everything, I truly, truly mean that perception is everything. And saying that, I know that that's not always the case. So I'm not naive in this, but that is the way I approach it.
Really, really fascinating, and thank you for that insight. I'll end with a comment on my portion of the time here, and that is you use the word trustworthiness,
Mm-hmm.
and emphasized your earning of the public trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really, really interesting to use that phrase and your assertions about perception
Mm-hmm.
together creates a certain gray area, because when you're talking about trustworthiness, you're not necessarily talking about getting every individual to trust you. You're talking about being worthy of that trust.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you don't want certain people to trust you, right? Because they're bad actors. They would leverage that trust, right? They would take advantage of the situation, right? And so you want to earn the trust of everyone as a whole, but not necessarily every single individual, because trust is about perception sometimes.
But I am careful.
I'm
That's
not saying you
probably
shouldn't be
something I did
careful.
not throw in there, but I am careful. Yes, yes, yeah.
Absolutely. You what I took from it in this form of trustworthiness, you having to tell somebody no about something that you don't have control over, that
Mhm.
could, in their perception, deviate from their trust that you're going to do the best you can for them. You see
Sure,
what I'm saying? You see
sure,
what I'm saying?
sure.
Their
Yeah.
perception is, if their perception is paramount, then you might have lost their trust in
And,
following
and they may
the
and they may
rules.
think, well, she won't do it for me, but she'll do it for her friends. Sure. I
Cor-
mean, that could definitely be a takeaway if they wanted. Yeah.
But in so doing, you might have earned the trust of three, four, five, seven, 100 other people because you towed the line, because you stayed within the bounds of your charge. And that does earn public trust, which
Right.
is discrete from every individual's trust. And it's fascinating to hear you talk about it in that way. So thank you for that. I'm going to defer to Elle now and stop talking.
Thank you. Hi, Elle. Thank you.
Yes. And so I think Dr. B set me up for a good understanding of kind of the question, and how I present in my section is, I think integrity is integral. And I think that's why it's given in that kind of clause. And so I think whenever people, especially younger or less experienced in research, we think of innocent until proven guilty. And so I wonder, in these elected representatives, how are you able to prove you're responsible until proven irresponsible? And how do you manage this rule follower through the years, with also making sure that you're a friendly and agreeable case to come upon? And so I think you do an excellent balance, but I just want you to talk about, how do you manage that innocent until proven guilty mindset of running for office?
Well, I do think that it's a building block that you have when you start out, and as you go and build relationships along the way, and how you treat people. I mean, respect is such a key part of this. You may not like what I have to say, but I am going to be very respectful. I am going to listen to you. And I am going to tell you that I understand, because I do understand. There are people that come into my office that they can't afford the penalty. And I feel terrible that that's what I have to do. And I let them know that I feel bad. And like I said before, and even in my essay, that if I could find a way, I will always seek a way if it falls within the guidelines that I can. But it's doing that, my staff seeing that. If you went to any of my staff members and asked them, will she back you up on what, if she says XYZ, will she, and you say that, will she back you up? Emphatically, they will tell you yes, because it is all about what you do within your office, how you demonstrate your leadership and your support, and then how you deal with the public, that they see how you deal with them, treat them respectfully, and that you're consistent in what you say, that they tell their friends and they tell their friends. And you just build those relationships as time goes on. But I still believe, I mean, even if you bring someone in that's brand new, I'm going to trust you. I mean, that's just my personality. I'm going to trust you until you give me a reason not to. That's that, because how else am I going to operate in this environment of dealing with money unless I have that approach? Now, do I have very strong internal controls? Absolutely. I mean, there is no question. I check everything personally. No money gets transferred out of here that I'm not signing off on. And they all know that. Now, there may be 3 people that look at it beforehand, but I'm still going to have the final and say, aces, you can go, because that's just who I am too.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Great job.
Thank you very much.
Of course, of course. Helen, you are up, and you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to share my screen. It's not working, is it?
Is there, you have the button available to you, yes?
Yeah. But it's not coming up.
I'm going to make you a co-host just to see if that helps.
All right. All right, let's see if this does it. Did that do it?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
I do have my PowerPoint, and this is my presentation on ethics in public service. I'll talk about my personal ethics statement. I'll discuss the Code of Ethics project, my ethics profile, my case study, a couple of midterm questions, and then follow up with basically the theme of this is how I see the compliance approach combined with the integrity approach. This course has highlighted a lot of the friction that I've felt between public service legal requirements, especially transparency and legal ethics. What I mean by that is transparency or FOIA requirements are actually a lot of black and white. And when I do provide a legal opinion on it, I've been surprised by a lot of pushback by public officials and staff into trying to push it into the gray area. In other words, when you're supposed to disclose, why can't you come up with a reason for why I don't have to disclose this? My position moving forward is I will rely on court cases where these laws have been interpreted and provide written opinions regarding these decisions to public service clients I have in order to provide them with the best advice to assist them in making ethical decisions. And this combines the compliance approach with integrity as I train public managers on ethics and demonstrate how violations of transparency laws are enforced in the courts of Virginia. The transparency law, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, actually contains this sentence at the very beginning, which is very rare from the General Assembly to see such a powerful statement, black and white, of intent of the law. The affairs of government are not intended to be conducted in an atmosphere of secrecy, since at all times the public is to be the beneficiary of any actions taken at any level of government. You work in public administration, you work for the public. I mean, that's the way I interpret that sentence. FOIA requires public managers to maintain public records and produce them upon request, and to ensure that meetings of public officials are open to the public to ensure transparency. There are the exceptions, the gray areas, and those deal with things, there's a whole list of them, but the most notable are personnel, economic development, and public safety matters. Those are generally exceptions and don't have to be produced. Meetings involving those discussions are not public meetings normally. Two case examples that happened this year was in nearby Orange County. The Piedmont Environmental Council filed a FOIA request for documents on a rezone that Orange County did on 2,500 acres. This was the largest rezone that had ever been done in Orange County. And the Piedmont Environmental Council was concerned because they wanted to know what was going to be developed on this property that had formerly been a gold mine. And they had environmental concerns. The response by Orange County was they couldn't reveal any of these records because there was a non-disclosure agreement. The Piedmont Environmental Council filed a lawsuit, and shortly before the hearing, Orange County turned over the non-disclosure agreement, which showed that it was going to be used by Amazon for data centers. This is just a stock photograph. This isn't what is actually in Orange County because this issue is ongoing. The other case involved public meetings and the Suffolk County School Board, and it went to the Supreme Court of Virginia, and the Supreme Court of Virginia determined that that board violated the open meeting requirement when, during COVID, two of the school board members escorted a member of the public out of the meeting room where the board meeting was going to take place, and there were empty seats in the room. And the woman was told she could watch on a live stream outside the meeting room. And the Supreme Court said that was not sufficient, that an open meeting means you have the right to be in the room where the meeting takes place. The two school board members were also, the woman that filed the FOIA violation wanted them to be held individually liable because there is a downfall if you violate FOIA and it is intentional as a public employee or public official, you can be fined and have to pay the fine. The government can't pay that. You have to pay it out of your own money. And the Supreme Court decided that those two elected officials were not individually liable because they both claimed, among other things, that they had been given legal counsel that told them they could do what they did. Now, the attorney for the Suffolk School Board has received a lot of grief in the public, in the press, because there's the argument that, well, you shouldn't have given that advice. I will just say that sometimes people say their attorney told them something, and that may not be what the attorney said. But these are examples of what I'm saying that I would provide in written advice to make sure that future decisions that public officials can understand what the ramifications of these decisions are. The Code of Conduct project I did was for United States District Court judges. The District Court judges and the Court of Appeals judges do have a Code of Conduct that was adopted by the Judicial Conference in 1973. This is a social contract whereby the judges give up some of their liberties to gain the promise of all following the rules. The code does not have enforcement, but it references other laws that do regulate gifts to judges and judicial conduct. So it's a totality of legal rules and a code of conduct. The paper, which I did in October of this year, brought out the fact that the Supreme Court had been severely criticized for not having a code of conduct. The Congress, as well as members of the public and the press, had requested that the court do that because there had been several high-profile situations where Supreme Court justices had been given gifts by individuals that had cases pending before the Supreme Court. And one Supreme Court justice even pointed out the true fact that, well, Congress can't do anything to regulate them. I mean, that's what's in the Constitution. These were deontological decisions because the justices weren't required to act in the public interest. But in November of this year, the Supreme Court did adopt its own code of conduct, and it doesn't contain any enforcement mechanisms. But I do predict that in future confirmation hearings, I would assume that members of the Senate will ask all the future candidates what their position is on this code of conduct and how they intend to comply with it. My ethics profile involved the Bristol, Virginia Utilities, BVU, and Stacy Pomrenke. BVU is a public authority, a separate body politic. That's the language the General Assembly uses. And it is formed to provide sewer and water, electricity, internet, and phone service, and cable television to about 16,000 residents. And the jurisdictions it encompasses are Scott County, Washington County, the city of Bristol, Virginia, and Sullivan County, Tennessee. So it's a separate political body, and the members of those governing boards appoint the board that oversees BVU. Stacy Pomrenke was the chief financial officer of BVU, and in 2013, the FBI and the IRS began to investigate BVU for public corruption. And Stacy, along with I think about 8 or 9 other officials in BVU, 2 of the board members, the legal counsel, the president, and 2 of the vice presidents, and some other officials, and Stacy, they were all charged in federal court on federal violations. And everybody pled guilty except Stacy, who requested a trial because I think Elle pointed out, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And this photograph shows Stacy holding the hand of her husband, who was then a juvenile and domestic relations district court judge appointed by the General Assembly. And she is doing a perp walk into the federal courthouse in Abingdon. And those 2 gentlemen in front of her are her attorneys. And she stood trial for almost 30 charges of fraud, lying to the Social Security Administration on W-2 forms, extortion, bribery, accepting kickbacks. She would take tickets to Cincinnati Reds baseball games and gift certificates to spas in exchange for her promise to try to help the individuals giving these gifts get public contracts with BVU. And she also, and this is a federal violation, one of her counts was that she put on her resume that she had an MBA from Virginia Tech, when actually she did not. So she was tried in federal court. It was about a 3-week jury trial, and she was found guilty and sentenced to 34 months in federal prison. My takeaways from this, that during the trial, the government introduced the BVU Code of Business and Ethical Conduct that was adopted in 2009. And there was specific note that Stacy was at the board meeting when this code of ethics was adopted. And we've talked a lot in this class about having codes of ethics, but I guess my main point is they must be enforceable and they must be enforced. There was evidence that Stacy gave out Christmas bonuses to BVU employees at a Christmas party. She was giving out cash and gift cards. And one of the other defendants that pled guilty testified against her. And he said that at the party, he took her aside and he told her, you can't do this. This isn't right. And he says, and this is the exact quote, she said, this is what we do at BVU. And seeing all this play out in real time and then comparing it to what I've learned in this class, it really drove home a point that I'd never realized until this class, that we have to have an ethical culture. And if not, then it impacts every employee in the organization. And giving out those cash and gift cards to all the employees kept them quiet. They were a part and parcel of all of this public corruption that was going on. The aftermath of this is really tragic. Stacy and Kurt, after she did her 34 months in jail, Kurt is the judge, her husband, they pled guilty to fraud after her convictions because they both tried to convince a federal probation officer that Stacy had a really severe alcohol problem when she didn't. And the reason for that was to reduce her original sentence so she could go to a halfway house. And the federal judge sentenced a state court judge to 12 months and 1 day in federal prison. And he sentenced Stacy to another 30 months in federal prison for this violation. And this quote that I've shown here from Menzel is so appropriate, in my opinion, to this whole drama. Public managers who do not understand why the word public, I'm going back to the transparency law, the public cannot be removed from their job descriptions or cannot grasp why ethical competence is essential to effective governance should ply their trade in less demanding occupations. And that's actually what's happened. The Supreme Court of Virginia did remove Kurt Pomrenke from the bench after the federal conviction. But I think in going back to the discussion about integrity, at one point, this was a power couple. They were making almost $500,000 a year together in Southwest Virginia with their salaries. I have no idea why somebody would take a $100 gift certificate to a spa in that situation. They were held out to the public as high integrity, highly ethical people, and obviously that was not the case. My case study involved the Whittier Sewer Project, and this dealt a lot with the Public-Private Partnership Act. It was a situation where there was a school in North Carolina that really needed sewer and water, and the locality worked out this deal with there was a nearby Indian tribe that was trying to develop a golf course in a luxury residential neighborhood. And there was a church that was using a lot of property for church camps. And they put it all together to try to put together this water and sewer project, which eventually happened. But the problems along the way all had to deal with, there's delays in contracting. And then when the contract finally comes in, you have to come up with a lot more money than you had originally thought on the original bid. And it was a problem with all of that and how to work it out. But my main takeaways were that public managers often work with other political entities and private sector businesses on public projects. And again, I'm just going to drive home that word public, that their role in that is to ensure that the public interest and public value are preserved. The questions on the midterm involved the integrity approach and the compliance approach. And my conclusion was, as I've mentioned in my ethics, personal ethics statement, is that they need to work together. You need to have the BVU code of ethics, but you also have to have some sort of compliance approach and enforcement outside of the federal prosecutor's office to ensure that that locality, that public entity is functioning properly. And finally, in ethical decision-making, I think that the best part of that is it takes you away from that black and white perspective, that's that gut reaction. Oh yeah, I know this is the right thing to do. And with that ethical decision-making model, you outline, well, this is Black and this is white, and you have to come up with what those gray things are in between to at least force you to think through, well, maybe what my gut reaction wasn't exactly right, or maybe it was. So that would be my whole take on this. This has been a wonderful class. It has helped me a lot in seeing through these things, but I will just go back to my original point that in public administration, when there's doubt, you have to resolve it in favor of the public, and especially in FOIA, when the General Assembly sends out such a clear signal and puts it in the code, that, in my opinion, that settles the issue. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Helen. Excellent job. Really well done. So I've got a question, and again, we'll open it up to the class for questions. So interesting, your framework for your reasoning on this presentation. I think I've got a pretty clear question. I don't really need to couch it in anything. What does it mean for the public when a code of ethics or conduct of a public organization contains no enforcement mechanisms? And are there situations where that might be appropriate?
Well, I mean, I think it's in the reading that I guess that if you have all this compliance, that you're going to this least common denominator, that all you're going to set up is this is what's expected. And I guess I have a lot of trouble with, well, what actually is wrong with that? Going back to the judicial code situation, I think there really is a true issue as to if the Supreme Court of the United States had enforcement, who's going to do it? It's going to be the 9 of them. They're going to have to say, well, you know, you have the worst parking spot for a month, or I get one of your clerks. I mean, you know, really, I'm joking, but I really don't know what they're going to do to each other because they all get their salary and they all get their jobs until they die. And there's that, you know, I don't know what they can do to each other. I don't think there's anything they can. So there's a reality there. Going back to the BVU example, I mean, I do feel, I wrote that in my paper, it was brought out by the United States Attorney, and Judge Jones wrote that in that opinion. And that was days and days and pages, but he had this whole paragraph dedicated to that. And there was this whole thing about how Stacey was at that meeting when that was adopted. And I know Judge Jones, I practiced in front of him, and to be honest with you, he's the worst judge that could have tried this. He sentenced all these people. They at least got 6 months. The lawyer, Walt Bressler, went to federal prison for 6 months. It to me sends the signal that if you're going to do it right. Use it. I mean, I think the whole point that the judge was making and that the jury picked up on is that was some sort of banner or band-aid you had that you didn't even look at, you know. I mean, it was just so flagrant the way this all played out. And how, I mean, I get the whole idea that the one person, you know, he was trying to tell Stacey, you can't do it, and she shut him up. But you know, how did it get to be that she got away with it? I mean, it was kind of, it's very upsetting.
Well, and it's very interesting to me when we're talking about consequences, when we're talking about consequentialism and enforcement mechanisms, we invariably get to the argument of the stakes of not having enforcement, right? What are the stakes if, so say we have this organization that has these guidelines for behavior, and they're a little vague, and people have to sign it when they walk in the door, but the stakes for them not following it aren't all that high, right? You could envision a situation where enforcement's not really necessary here because we're not talking about all that much. We're talking about how, you know, code for behavior, how we're expected to act. Maybe the only consequence is you lose your job. It's not legal, for example, yeah? But the higher the stakes get, the more it's possible that enforcement mechanisms may be needed to gain compliance from people according to the code. And I feel like that's where your argument has it's robust, right? Because you picked all of these cases or all of these examples in which the stakes are really high for public trust in particular, right? And so then the expectation from the public for behavior becomes higher too. And enforcement becomes more necessary. So interesting and fascinating. So thank you for that. Any other questions from the class? Charity.
Thanks, Helen. This was really fascinating. I'm just curious, in the case, the BVU case, do you think that, you know, it's clearly like lots of consequences for this behavior, but I kind of get the sense that that maybe because it was so blatant, and the fact that she had been there when they did, you know, when they voted on this code, do you think that that influenced sort of the outsized consequences in comparison to maybe other cases, maybe somebody who came after that period, or if it had been a little less overt than handing out cash bonuses at the party and things like that? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, because it seems like sometimes we only see real consequences with these extreme cases, where it can then become easy to say, well, yeah, but that was really bad. What this happens over here, that's not that bad. So I was just curious what your thoughts were on that, and if the circumstances may have changed. I mean, what's going on with BVU now? Did they clean house, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they definitely cleaned house. I mean, they had to, because everybody was a convicted felon and they had to kind of start afresh. And it was tragic. I mean, it was sad. I mean, these were people that you knew that were highly respected. I mean, all of these other people, not just Stacey and her husband. But going to your question, I mean, this was a decision by a jury. I talk about the judge's decision, but and when the federal feds try you in a criminal case, it's a tsunami. And they really expected that Stacey would plead guilty and play nice. I don't think they would have cared about the Virginia Tech degree or not, but it was just when you tell them you're going to take a trial, buddy, they don't hold back anything. They don't, you know, they don't cut you any slack. And so having seen all that, and then the other thing, I showed you that photograph. I mean, that was a judge that had a full-time job 5 days a week. He walked into that courthouse every day with her, and he sat behind her. You know, you sit, there's the counsel table, there's the bar. He sat right behind the bar and looked at the jury. I had to go in there for a lot of cases during that trial. He sat there the whole time and looked at the jury. And I know that there was some sort of, you know, I love this woman and I'm, you know, stand by your woman kind of mentality there, but it backfired, because I think that, you know, that was over the top. That was a little bit too much. And then one of the things he did, he got a list of the witnesses, which he wasn't supposed to get. Those lawyers weren't supposed to provide it to him. And he started contacting the witnesses, and he called one guy and he left a number of voicemails, and that was played in court. And it was, "This is Judge Kurt Pomrenke. Call me back. I want to talk to you about the trial." Well, the guy never calls back. And guess what he does? He takes out his judicial letterhead and he writes a letter to this person at the address that he's not supposed to have, and he mails it. And that letter is in evidence, you know, where it says, "Look, I know you're going to testify about Stacey, but remember all the good things about her." And so, I mean, you know, and when I say, you know, a judge had to sentence another judge, I had to go into the lockup to talk to another client. And I was in there when the marshals brought him in handcuffs. And it was, he wouldn't look at me in the eye. I felt so sorry for him, but it was over the top. So.
Elle, I'm sorry, but I do have to cut off time for questions, so we have time for everybody else. But we can definitely take questions offline if you want to follow up with Helen later. Helen, thank you again. Really great job. And Angie, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
So good evening, everyone. Some of us are going to be graduating here soon. So like Charity, this is our last class, most of us in here. So it's very exciting. So good evening. Congratulations, everyone. Over the last year, I've had the opportunity to craft a short but powerful ethics statement while working with a career coach as I seek ways to settle into my newer role, manage time, seek opportunities for wellness and personal growth, alongside dealing with the pressures of an executive leadership position in an ever-changing, challenging urban center like Roanoke is. That personal ethics statement that I've crafted with that coach is that I am consistent and factual, transparent, focused, and I live, work, and play with integrity, passion, and commitment. And I strive to be the best version of myself by applying continuous learning, values, ethics, and morals into all decisions. This statement is supported by course materials from this class and described throughout my final portfolio paper. This semester, I've gained an extensive insights into ethical principles for public services. As an assistant city manager for the city of Roanoke, I've crafted a personal ethics statement emphasizing consistency and transparency and integrity and decision-making. And as an ethical leader, I prioritize accountability, avoiding compromises for personal gain, and crediting others for their contributions. My commitment extends to the following: the International City County Manager, or ICMA's Code of Ethics, and employing various leadership styles in alignment with these ethical principles through ethical decision-making is guided by moral sensitivity and judgment, and is crucial for my role as a public administrator. With having served in public service for 21 years, this coursework has reinforced my commitment to ethical management. So for the first assignment, the ICMA has a comprehensive and enforceable code of ethics. This was established in 1924 and regularly revised. The Code of Ethics as the core of ICMA's mission, aligning with David McGraw's social contract theory. Despite Hobbes' belief that ethical institutions serve individual self-interest, ICMA's focus on professional advancement is evident. The code's effectiveness is analyzed through enforceability and demonstrated by an effective board handling report violations and resulting in various outcomes, including censures, suspensions, expulsions, or removals from the association. ICMA functions as a community, meeting characteristics outlined by McGraw, such as the common sense of identity, continuation of the profession, shared values, and ongoing recruitment opportunities. While ICMA is not mandatory, holding ICMA credentials enhances one's standing in the local government profession. And it's seen in the recruitment process across the country. Overall, ICMA's Code of Ethics serves as a model for analyzing the effectiveness of ethical guidelines within a professional organization. For the second ethics assignment, I researched and read about an unethical city manager on the other side of the country. In 2010, a city manager in Bell, California, Robert Rizzo, faced a scandal over being a public official over public official salaries, including his own, which was exposed by the Los Angeles Times. ICMA censored and expelled Rizzo for violating 6 tenets of their Code of Ethics. 2 incidents highlighted Rizzo's behavior. First was his lack of transparency in the compensation process, which violated Tenet 9 of the Code of Ethics, and he also lacked transparency and procedural justice. He also didn't follow proper procedures and express salary. If he expressed those salary desires openly, he may have resulted in a kind of a different outcome. Rizzo also misused city funds for personal loans, breaching Tenet 12, reflecting a clear conflict of interest. The ethical self-reflection, if he had done an ethical self-reflection or an audit, it could have steered him away from such actions. The aftermath of this scandal, Rizzo was, he lost the public trust, faced legal consequences, being found on 69 counts of public corruption. ICMA expulsion signaled a breach of ethical standards agreed upon with his membership of ICMA. And remarkably, 10 years later, the city of Bell and the state of California implemented really robust safeguards and parameters and improvements really across the state. But specifically there in the city of Bell. The city recovered $10 million of the $78 million in claims, resolving 60 lawsuits. Institutional changes included commissions, ordinances, procurement laws, audits, state level reforms, and All of this was aimed at preventing reoccurrence of such ethical breaches, demonstrating the lasting impact of the city manager's actions on governance in Vail, California. For the case analysis, I wrote about the Pioneer Scouts of Rose Ravine. And this was an interesting case study. So as a high-level overview of the case, the Pioneer Scouts of Rose Ravine was a nonprofit organization. They were confronted with challenges due to declining national membership and financial instability. Operating with an annual budget under $1 million, they heavily relied on cupcake sales and program fees and limited grants. A planned merger with another group called the Buffalo Bells Council. This merger that was planned collapsed due to Rose Ravine's hidden debt issues. So the organization's executive director, Debbie O'Flanagan, she's several health issues that she was faced with. And it's really created like kind of a leadership vacuum. Despite the attempts to raise funds and negotiate with the merger, the organization ultimately dissolved, leading to staff layoffs, financial struggles, a significant impact on the volunteers and the scouts of Rose Ravine. My narrative really highlights the complexities and the struggles faced by Rose Ravine, emphasizing the broader issues affecting the nonprofit organization in today's competitive and changing landscape. The Pioneer Scouts for Rose Ravine case study unravels various ethical dilemmas impacting the stakeholders at a national, regional, and the local levels. The organization's mission, promoting strength and integrity, really faces challenges due to the actions of the key figures, which is that executive director, Debbie O'Flanagan, Sandy Cruz, and she is the director of program services, and then the council. And these ethical implications for the stakeholders necessitate a thorough analysis, recommendations, post-recommendation safeguards. So with O'Flanagan, the failure to utilize FMLA when needed really resulted in ineffective leadership prompted by her actions. Had she taken some recommendations and applying principles of public service, emphasizing integrity and accountability, and really selfless service, would have resulted in better outcomes. In this case, a self-reflection and ethics audit would have been recommended, with the decision-making process involving her as the executive leader of this organization stepping down, or at least utilizing FMLA, would demonstrate that accountability. And some other post-recommendation safeguards involve the council oversight, where there was none in this particular case, temporary leave, the medical certification, and potentially assigning an interim director for the appointment of this in this case study. The Sandy Cruz, she was a very aggressive leader, and so this really created poor morale in the organization. So establishing really ethical organization policies and practices. The decision-making process would have involved a contractual agreement outlining expectations and objectives, and promoting a greater ethical climate. Some safeguards would have included mentorship through the national organization, which is the National Pioneer Scouts of America. And for the council, the ethical impacts here was their failure to do a feasibility study for the organization, and the renovation project in the merger really alluded to a real ethical concern. The recommendation emphasizes protecting the public interest and the collaboration with this other merging organization, the Buffalo Bluffs. The decision-making process would have involved more transparent decision-making, respecting autonomy. The post-recommendation safeguards would have been to actually complete that feasibility study. And this case study really underscores the vital roles of ethics and morals and the values for an organization's success. As without that ethical leadership and the clear parameters, turnover, the diminishing of morale, and the organization's collapse, it was obviously foreseen. The proposed recommendations really aim to foster a more ethical culture with that organization, while the post-recommendation safeguards ensure really careful considerations and evaluation of those outcomes. So for the midterm assignment, so I'm going to share the two different questions. So for the first question, I utilized my experience with the Virginia Department of Social Services as they grapple with ethical dilemma with benefit programs, and specifically when processing welfare applications. And the specific dilemma that I described really outlines in the first question involving and navigating contrasting perspectives between deontology and consequentialism, with the deontological theory really influenced by Kant centers around the rightness and the wrongness of actions without considering those consequences. So with benefit program specialists really subscribing to deontology that strictly follow that training module and policies, irrespective of potential outcomes. In contrast, consequentialist theory evaluates actions based on those outcomes, allowing for the rule breaking if benefits outweigh those consequences. So in a real life case, I described a single mother facing eviction, and food insecurity applies for SNAP, which is Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So a deontologists follow a strict verification procedure. So they're going to follow those procedures or following those processing orders, even in dire situations. Consequentialists prioritize those applications based on the perceived need, potentially processing without all those required verifications maybe, or anticipating really greater benefits. And so the consequences for this, the benefit program specialists, they're involving with families who are not returning verifications when they're applying for benefits. There's potential fraud. There's also disciplinary actions for those benefit program specialists. And so from this deontologist standpoint, involving child protective services due to food insecurity is considered, potentially leading to children being removed from the home until the mother is able to secure employment or ensure that she has really plans in place to manage her family. In essence, this ethical dilemma underscores a clash between strictly adhering to those ethical principles or prioritizing the outcomes that overrule. And so the benefit program specialist faces really a moral obligation to uphold federal, state, and local welfare policies, irrespective of those potential negative outcomes and those consequences. For the second question, I discussed and described really the leadership styles and how they play a pivotal role in shaping ethical culture in organizations and in the integrity in organizations, with distinct implications across various levels. So with transactional and transformational styles, differing in their approaches, the influence organization values and outcomes, with transactional leaders focusing on the efficient processes may stifle creativity, while transformational leaders inspire innovation, yet their approach might lack formal structure. Entrepreneurial and creative leadership styles, they're similar in being risk takers and innovators, really looking at their impact on ethics, and that entrepreneurial leader emphasizing business and value, potentially leading to transparency issues and overlooking employee workload, and creative leaders fostering innovation, but may neglect processes, organization-wide values. Matching these leadership styles to organization positions is crucial, and really, in my opinion, suited for more mid-level management and creative leaders in earlier supervisory roles. But all leadership styles carry ethical implications, and emphasizing the importance of balanced approach. Integrating the best features of transactional and transformational qualities can lead to an ethical leadership and positive impacts on a community. While ethical challenges are inevitable, leaders have responsibilities to navigate with integrity, ensuring positive contributions to the communities that they serve always. So having navigated the semester exploring ethical principles, I now stand differently as an assistant city manager with more of a crystallized personal ethics statement, where I'll repeat that I'm consistent, factual, transparent, and focused, and I live, work, and play with integrity and commitment. And this guides me through my challenging role with the city of Roanoke. And as an ethical leader, honesty and accountability are paramount to me. And the public eye, my personal life mirrors the high ethical standards expected of me professionally, and adhering to both my code and to the ICMA. I embody various leadership styles of transactional, transformational, being creative and adapting to situations, emphasizing my commitment to ethical leadership. And decision-making, fairness, justice, and integrity guide my actions. Moral sensitivity and judgment are there to ensure that I make right choices, motivated by the aim to build positive reputations, personally and professionally. With over 2 decades in public service, this coursework solidifies my moral foundation and commitment to ethical management and shaping my roles as an assistant city manager. Thank you.
Fantastic job, Angie. Really great.
Thank you.
So it's apparent in your approach to this class and to the assignments that you chose that you sort of work self out, right? You start inward and work your way out in your thinking. And that's sort of how your presentation was set up as well. And I really have a lot of respect for that. I hear that the resonance of that in how you talk about how you want to be in public service. And so my question for you hones in on one little thing you said at the beginning of your presentation. I don't think it came back up, except maybe echoes of it. You talked about something at the end of your ethics statement. You tacked on something that was sort of giving credit where credit was due, or something of that nature. It was giving credit to people who do good that are outside of yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And acknowledging that. And so I wanted to parse that out a little bit in my question, which is, how does giving credit where it's due help you or someone manage behavior in an ethical way? How are those connected?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I'll tell you why that's very important to me. Throughout my career, especially when I was younger, or more early in on my career, I'm still just 26. There was a lot of people that would say went ahead of me, right? And they stood on my work. And that was very frustrating. And I wanted to ensure that no one ever felt that way. And I have found that throughout my career, the more I highlight other people's great work, really, it helps me. It helps me. I'm not doing it for my personal gain. I'm doing it for them. But when all of the people around me are shining, and I'm also shining. And so that's very important to me, to highlight everyone else's responsibilities, their work, their talents, and what they bring to the table. And what I have found when I do that as a leader, I'm creating a wonderful environment. Those people will follow me into the flames of hell, and they will when I create that type of environment for them. So I'm going to always highlight those around me.
It's so interesting because when we talk colloquially, we talk about ethical leaders, right? Where in reality, we're talking about ethical leadership, mm-hmm. right? I have a real issue with talking about a person being unethical. Mm-hmm. Their behavior is unethical to me, right? And in the same way in management, we're talking about managing behavior, not how people think, right? It's not my responsibility as a manager to manage how you think. It's to manage the behavior that happens in the organization. And so I feel like you make a clear distinction with that when you talk about your behavior of promoting ethics, mm-hmm. acknowledges the behavior of others when it's good and giving that credit. It separates the individual from the behavior itself. And I think that's a really important step we have to take when it's for the good or for the more unethical behavior, right?
That's right.
It's issue-based, not person-based. Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
not personal. It's about what people do. And that is what makes this an ethical management class and not just the philosophy of ethics, right?
Absolutely.
We don't stop at the theory. We talk about where it hits the ground, and you've done that admirably. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Elle,
Yes. Angie, comment on the answer of that. I love how you went into when you give, you get back. And that's like proven. The only scientifically method proven way to receive dopamine is through exercising and volunteering. So every time I do someone a favor, I'm like, I'm doing this so I get the good hormones. But you always say your fun fact is that you've only worked for the Roanoke government. This is where your passion has been, and you continue to stay there because of the purpose you feel developed. And so I challenge you and I ask you, has your ethical statement been built on top of through your experience, or has it been built up by your experience working in the Roanoke government?
That's a great question. I think it's been built as I've grown in the organization. You know, I have faced some challenges here, and really, Elle, I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I have concentrated my career here in the city of Roanoke is because of how we serve the community, but not only that, about how we treat people internally. And we are an organization whom is ethical, and we apply, and we don't just walk the talk. We don't. I'm terrible at those things. We don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk, and we really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organization. And to me, that promotes strong ethics in an organization too. And that, I mean, to answer your question, it has grown within me with me, but it is also because of where I am now. I also get to foster that. I also get to continue to grow that and ensure that that is still happening in our organization. So from where I was, my first part of my career with the city wasn't there. But where I am now, I can ensure that other people have the same experiences I do. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
we are running right on time, so let's thank Angie once again. Really appreciate it, Angie. And Elle, you are up, and you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. Let me get my shared screen ready. And I'll make sure everyone can see it before I start. Are the visuals good? Okay, great. So thank you for listening and your attention on this topic of our personal ethics. And I think as most of us use our experience in explaining and relating theoretically and practically to the arguments and devices that we've had, we reflect on our public service, because most of us are in a position that we're a public servant, and it may be in a political field or a career field. And I think both of those give us our different hats to put on. So I think the reason that I have my ethical statement of intention of respect, honesty, and effort to create a lasting purpose, it's built on my ethical foundation. I think that this can be implemented through your political environment or your social environment, which to my personality was given first through religion. And I don't think that we need to focus on religion as a spiritual experience, but as the type of management that we are given as a child. You're told, pray before you have dinner, because that's the management of being grateful for what you have received. So it's this managing of how your schedule goes throughout the day. On Sunday, you're going to go to church, and then throughout the week, you're going to study for your purpose in your school, and then one day your working career. This transformed as I moved into college and chose my area of study. I chose my undergrad as philosophy, politics, and economics. The philosophical aspect was grown out of the understanding of why we choose these decisions. So the intention of these three pillars. The politics was to understand the factual evidence in making these decisions, to respect each of the laws that are already performed and the past of what people have chosen to implement as these codes. Furthermore, the economics, because we have to have honesty and effort in these choices that we've made. Where are we gathering these resources and these capitals to create that lasting purpose? I liked this class because I was able to reflect on my past and on my future. Looking into our ethics assignments, I got to research the Virginia 4-H Code of Ethics. They say that once a 4-H'er, always a 4-H'er, and because it focuses on this youth development. So I had a 4-H presentation in high school that I reflect on commonly. It was on Why Leaders Eat Last of Simon Sinek, and it really honed in on the management styles of whether it be you doing a presentation or working at a 4-H summer camp. It really focused on the 3 rules of respect, honesty, and effort in implementing these 3 pillars. This training was really honed in on because it was the primary purpose of Virginia 4-H's program's Code of Ethics to have positive development of youth, emphasizing the 4-fold development of a young person's head for pledging their head to clear thinking, their heart for greater loyalty, their hands for larger service, and their health to better living for their club, community, country, and world. This is important because the 4 building blocks are used within the 4 pillars of Virginia 4-H, being civic engagement, healthy living, STEAM, and agriculture. Unlike professional codes of ethics, which are typically created and enforced with specific professions, this code applies to a broader range of individuals involved in 4-H, including not only the youth members, but the parents and volunteers that create the program. It sets an expectation for the behavior of all participants in the program during the in-school classes, after-school clubs, competitions, and camps. One of our authors, McGraw, focused on this professional code of ethics on how it can have an impact beyond the profession itself, affecting the larger society. Moving over into looking at something that affects my career in the current day. As you all may know, I'm the executive assistant to the Virginia Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, and I got to have a different mindset going into this program. I was a Virginia Governor's Fellow working under the Secretary of Education. So I got to have a management style that my role was to simply learn. I had 4 months of being there. Any assignment you don't want to do, please give to me. I'm here just to soak up and be encouraged through learning about the Virginia process. Helpful to me, I am a Virginian, so seeing how the education affects students, I got to reflect on how COVID affected students in the year 2020. However, that was my senior year. I had already taken all of my advanced classes online, so my transition was much smoother, even though being in rural Virginia, because we were used to already having these constraints that other people were not used to. McDonald versus the United States, which it was an analysis of public corruption and official action. It really focused in on political officials and political fundraising. This is still evident in my work today, as we are now required to fill out ethics forms on anything more than the worth of $50. I think this is important because it doesn't only mean if you receive the amount of $50, but something worth $50. There are many loopholes, as if wanting to go to the Virginia horse races, they will say the ticket is marked at $48.97, and they will show the billing of having military expense because you work closely with the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. They will have the senior citizen discount because you may be close enough to that age range, and further exceptions listed to create it under that $50 amount. Though it's listed at the $48.76, it doesn't even mean that you'll be paying that amount. It is just listed under the ethics form to keep us in these restraints. McDonald versus the United States was not used for these loopholes. It's used to find the corruption that we are looking for within government. The case of McDonald's versus the United States, if you are not familiar, unfolded against the backdrop of American politics, shedding the light on the intricate relationship between public officials and political fundraising. The protagonist, Robert McDonald, former governor of Virginia, faced allegations of corruption stemming from his interactions with Johnny R. Williams Sr., the former CEO of Star Scientific. McDonald was accused of accepting over $175,000 in gifts and loans from Williams. This is only the ones that they could find evidence for, and he blamed it all on his wife, which ironically, in contrast to the presentations given tonight, in which they might stand with their spouse. So in politics, it's not only affecting your individual person, it's affecting the ethics of who you associate yourself with. We all hear of a bad apple. One bad apple can affect the others in creating them molded. There's other theories in which the 5 most people you include in your life might change over the span of from when you're 15 to when you're 35, with only keeping less than 95% of your relationship. The legal background in this McDonald v. the United States was a legal terrain defined by 2 federal statutes, the Anti-Bribery Statute and the Hobbs Act, both aiming to combat public corruption. The pivotal issue resolved around the interpretation of official action under these statutes, a term critical to establishing corruption charges. This Supreme Court case undertook the task of delineating the boundaries between permissible conduct and illegal corruption. In my ethics case analysis, it took away from something that I had an experience in. It focused more on just looking at a case that I have no background in and applying my intentions and my ethical dilemmas to it. There was a large management and ethical dilemma presented through New York's child protective agencies. It was the death of a child that was under this administration. The case revolving around Marcellus Pierce's death exposes glaring management issues and ethical dilemmas within New York's child protective services. The profound failures at both individual and organizational levels necessitate a critical analysis grounded in management, ethics, and normative theory, alongside the application of practical management principles. The Child Development Support Corporation, or CDSC, in Brooklyn offered family support programs. They tried to make their attempt more authentic by partnering with nonprofits. The nonprofits did not follow up to the standards that they had set publicly, and all in all, it resulted in a death of a child for not following along to the check-ins and the ethics placed. So whenever we put an emphasis on our ethics or our intention, it is up to us to maintain those, or then we must follow back to the codes and laws that everyone agrees to, rather than just the personal intentions. In studying and presenting my midterm reviews, my first evaluation was in DEI. As you all may know, in the Youngkin administration, we do not use the word equity, but we do focus on the word equality. This is for a difference of understanding and definitional focus. We look for opportunities, including your background, but not necessarily quite to the equity portion. This is for various reasons that can be seen as political. So let's just focus on the DEI bureaucracies in Virginia's public administrations. The expansions of DEI bureaucracies in Virginia's public universities has recently become under scrutiny, probably because of the political affiliation with these different types of understandings. As these institutions have garnered attention for having the largest DEI bureaucracies among taxpayer-funded universities in the United States. When we explore ethical dimensions of this issue, we see an understanding of both the ontological and consequential perspectives. This main argument was provided by the Heritage Foundation, which is seen primarily as conservative. So when we're focusing on these ethical dilemmas, when it's expanded past an individual, we look towards the public interest. And this is invoked in these DEI policies. Consequentialism and deontology represent 2 distinct ethical frameworks, but are both in understanding what makes an action morally right or wrong. Deontology posits that certain human actions possess intrinsic moral qualities that render them either right or wrong. This classification is irrespective of the consequences that may yield. On the contrary, consequentialism asserts that the moral evaluation of actions hinges on the consequences or the outcomes it produces. In other words, the ethical worth of an action is determined by the net effect it has on individuals. This is important in our management styles, to focus not only on one or the other, but the blend of these understandings. Because as people like to focus on their love languages and trying to understand people, if they like to volunteer or if they like to spend quality time, people receive the same interaction when talking with their manager. Though it is not for the same intention, they still do respond better to positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, to words of affirmation or to quality time and sitting down and explaining what they didn't like about a project. These are very important in our management styles and our ethical organization, which can be reflected in some philosophical words like consequentialism and deontology. And finally, in my midterm reviews, I focused on the ethical implications of leadership styles in an organization. Leadership and ethics are indistinguishably linked. The pursuit of ethical behavior in organization has long been a central concern, given the substantial impact institutions have on societies, economies, and individual lives. This pursuit often takes two primary paths: the compliance approach and the integrity approach. These methods offer different strategies and mechanisms to integrate and enforce ethical behavior. Better navigating these organizational landscapes and promote ethical conduct effectively is crucial to understand the nuances of these approaches and see which one is most effective or how they can complement each other in a practical sense. Looking into the challenges of my deep dive and focusing on my intentions that I have in my personal ethics statement, I think our readings really focused on how we can understand things differently. Firstly, in my intention of respect, McGraw talks about Rawls and the notion of legitimacy. I think we all try to have a veil of ignorance when dealing with new situations. As Tanya mentions, she has to have multiple experiences in which she has never met the person or this is a recurring offender, but in each situation is trying to look at the situation at hand. I think it's ironic that when dealing with FOIA or the Freedom of Information Act, there's an irony of having to pay for looking at people who are stealing findings. It's these like veils of ignorances that we have to purposely put on ourselves because we have these external factors. So a veil of ignorance would allow someone to agree to it without knowing that the individual would exist within the system. In respect, we see that our laws or code of ethics are focusing on citizens' rights and how the codes can align. Next, looking at our honesty, I think that some of the readings that we are given focuses on the two-pronged idea of which is the chicken or the egg, which comes first, looking at our virtue and honesty, or looking at how we have good cooperation and social policy. Whenever we do these in coordination and parallel, we encourage our individual honesty. And finally, looking at our efforts that we present. Again, making sure that whenever we fill out these ethics forms, we fulfill our personal missions, or we even take an oath to become a member of a society or a political organization that, for example, No Child Left Behind Act incorporated provisions that aim to promote performance measurement and accountability. I think the honesty allowed us to have honest actions and intent, and this effort gave a purpose of our actions, a legacy that is long-lasting and providing that impact for that child that is not left behind. Overall, I think that my personal ethics statement allows me to be a public servant to giving back to individuals that I once was in that position, and I will continue to be in the future when no longer in this position. So I focus on having an intention of not only respect, but also honesty, to create an effort for a lasting purpose. Thank you for your time.
Great job, Elle. Thank you.
Of course.
So my question for you, I really appreciated the start of your presentation where you framed, you started with the example of religion and sort of framed it as a style of management of values and in particular practice, right? A management of practice, right? You have these things that you do in order to practice a religion and do so with behavior, right? There are a lot of other things that we base on practice, right? We base careers in law on practice. We base careers in medicine on practice. We use this word pretty frequently when we're talking about fields of study or fields of profession. And we also use this in public administration. You will notice integrated into our program is the articulation of the value of connecting theory to practice, right? You'll hear that very often in a lot of your classes in the MPA program. And so my question for you is, what are one or two ethical considerations for a career based specifically in practice?
Yeah, great question. And so listening to what you've said and these correlations of the breakdown, I think that practice is a type of management. And you can look at it simply whenever you're given a list of tasks to do and you make your to-do list, you're making your agenda for the day, your practice for the day, and how you want that flow to go. And I think the theory to practice connection is our thought to action connection. So I think we have these synonymous types of efforts and two ways of practice that I can think of. And I like to be very literal because I think that's a more attainable example. Is let's talk about the first area or the first career. It could be a professional athlete. The practice, the actual practice that they go with their teammates and communicate. For example, rugby is a sport I'm familiar with. And so you have to communicate with your team. I'm passing you next. You have to be behind me in the line because you can only pass backward for it to be an eligible transfer of the ball. And so I think it's that communication style that is presented. It's the agreements to time that they will have to have. It's this practice and repetitive integration of their own management styles so that they can follow their simple code of ethics. And another type of ethical focus, I think, is working with children in pre-K. They are really attainable to finding this type of practice and repetitive feature. And so you say, don't hit your friend because it's going to make them cry. So when they do this practice, it can turn into an ethical reflection of, well, I had the time to not hit them and I got to reason, I'm just hungry. I'm not mad at them. I just want to focus on my own emotions that I'm trying to project. And so it's this practice which turns into a reflection of the thought to an action.
Really interesting answer to that question. I mean, obviously I've told the class that you're dealing with a former musician. Practice is also a really important element of that. And practice is doing, right? It is doing something. It's not just having a thought about something. And so I really admire your connection to that. And it's a very small leap from practice to management, right? It's all about behavior, and you make those connections really well. So thank you for that. I'll open the floor to the class for any questions you might have. All right. Well, great job. Thank you, Elle.
Thank you.
All right. We are ready to move on to Charity. So Charity, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Okay. All right, looks like it's up on the screen. We're good. All right, great. So I'll start off by saying that identifying my own personal code of ethics has been a bit of a process. It's something I would not have expected at the start of this semester. Because questions of ethical conduct have influenced some major choices in both professionally and personally in recent years, I think I assumed I knew exactly where I stood on these kind of questions. But through particularly reviewing the assignments that I completed for this course, I have gained a much clearer picture of my code and how various roles I fulfill influence its evolution. Through all of this runs a, not surprisingly, strong normative thread that's tempered with some, I like to think, hard-headed pragmatism gained through sometimes painful years of experience, which reflects both in my code and my approach, as I've seen in reviewing the semester's assignments. In considering my personal ethics, I realized that I currently fill 3 very different roles. The first is the most basic. I am a human who lives communally alongside others. And I'm also an instructor, both university students as well as working adults. And then recently, I have embarked on a path of academic scholarship where I hope to engage with other voices in my chosen discipline. Each one of these roles brings its own normative expectations for how I should conduct myself and serves as its own frame when I try to answer my question of what do I do now? Taken collectively, they add a lot of nuance to what I believe I should consider when making decisions, because they recognize that there can be a higher level of influence that comes with facets of these roles, such as being a parent versus a neighbor or a teacher or a collaborator, right? Than just simply existing within my, my immediate bubble. At the core of my approach to ethics is sort of in the words of my late grandmother, to always hold my head high by considering how my choices can affect others' well-being and ensuring, particularly from a public sector perspective, that when I'm acting on behalf of others, their needs supersede my own. For example, as an instructor, particularly of undergraduates, my words and deeds can have an outsized influence on how they see themselves, their world, and their place within it. So I have a solemn duty to think very carefully about the potential ramifications of my choices. While I believe firmly that slavish adherence to the letter of the law is not always the just course, deviating from established norms should not be taken lightly. I've learned this semester that I am decidedly deontological in my orientation. I prefer to live and work within established boundaries that are informed by a shared social contract. Perhaps this is why I have found myself drawn throughout my career to bureaucratic, hierarchical organizations, even as my career has shifted between the private sector, the public sector, or the federal sector and the state sector. And this is a type of structure that usually has an answer to my what now question, even if I don't like it, which can be often, if I'm honest. Rereading through my course submissions, it's clear that my decidedly normative orientation is tempered by a touch of skepticism, maybe even cynicism, born of long experience of the vagaries of others. We're all flawed, so depending on our greater angels to guide our behavior seems hopelessly naive to me, as does an exclusively integrity-based approach to ethical codes. However, to live among others, we must be able to establish a baseline of trust that's predicated on shared beliefs about what actions are allowed within our social structures. When I choose to live within a society, and that can be physically living or being a member of, I agree to adhere to the limits on my autonomy that are imposed by its beliefs. I recognize that the only things I can truly control are my own actions, though by acting consistently in accordance with our shared norms, I may be able to influence how others interpret those actions. In many ways, my personal code, I have come to see, comes down to my version of kind of a Hippocratic oath, to do my best to do no harm to others that cannot be mitigated with a sincere apology, an acceptance of responsibility, and a commitment to learn from the experience, including endeavoring not to repeat it. And when that fails, there is always the Foreign Service mantra when faced with an ethical dilemma. Would I want to see this scenario and my role within it on the front page of the Washington Post? Came in very handy. What I've come to realize about my personal code of ethics is that it is less of a laundry list of what I will or will not do than an affirmation of my deliberate, voluntary acceptance of the ethical guidelines of the societies of which I choose to be a member. Of course, there are certain behaviors I can confidently say that I am unwilling and or unlikely to do, though I'm also enough of a pragmatist to avoid declarative statements like I would never, because those have a sneaky way of proving themselves wrong. I conclude, therefore, that my code centers around my respect for and adherence to others' codes, and that having voluntarily joined a society or organization, my ethical foundation prevents me from deviating from our shared behavioral expectations. And this provides me with the structure I clearly crave and the flexibility that navigating my various roles sometimes demands. Now, as I give a brief review of the assignments, I decided to frame them this way in how they connect with the statement that I just gave you. So I'll go through these fairly quickly, and then I'm happy to take any questions. So the first I've labeled the experience. Of course, I've talked quite a bit about my time at the State Department, and I won't go into a lot of detail here, but as I was rereading the statement that I wrote for this particular approach, it demonstrated several personal influences. This was the assignment where we had to look at a code of conduct. And the State Department's is very bureaucratic and hierarchical, which clearly speaks to my heart. It's grounded in law, but decidedly normative in its interpretation. It pulls from a variety of things, the US Code, the Code of Federal Regulations, and several executive orders. And it leans heavily into both compliance and deontological perspectives. Again, something that if I had thought about it beforehand, wouldn't say that that's what drew me to it, or at least made me appreciate it, but clearly resonated with me. What I particularly appreciate about the State Department's approach is how explicit it is. It's several pages, very detailed, and it calls out specifically that it's designed to prevent both inappropriate actions and the appearance of impropriety, which was something that was reinforced to me throughout my time. And to pull from McGraw, this idea of ethical codes as a social contract, because this is laid out as you are going to be held to this, right? It really makes a much more formal approach to that. The challenge, though, and I'll come back to this in a later assignment, is what happens when the ideal and reality diverge. Now, I realize, thank you, Elle, for introducing and giving such a great overview of the McDonald bribery scandal. I also wrote about this in my second case, but the difference here is that I focused on an aspect of it that I think really speaks to what we've been talking about in the integrity versus compliance approach. And this is how the McDonald bribery scandal, really pointed at what I deem as the insufficiency of the Virginia way. If you're not familiar with this, and I wasn't at first, I was overseas when this first broke. The Virginia way was this sort of accepted way in Virginia that before the McDonald scandal, there were no official guidelines. There were no prohibitions that were written into it. It was assumed among those in Richmond in power that, gentlemen legislators just are going to behave ethically. And so it was a system that really benefited everybody who participated in it and benefited from it because you just didn't have to talk about it, right? What was interesting was when the McDonald case came along, that it was really pointed to as well. This was very extreme. This was not something that would be allowed. The rest of us, we don't need a new code of conduct. The public really disagreed and put a lot of pressure on the General Assembly to pass one. And when they did, it was with a lot of reluctance, at least according to how it was described in the press. And all these questions of insufficiency, because here's the thing, some of the reasons that people pointed to that McDonald embarked on his behavior was because he as the governor was underpaid, which is a little undercut by the fact that he was in the top third in the US. But legislators themselves actually lagged way behind others in terms of what they get paid. And so the Virginia way was based on this idea that back when, early years of Virginia, that you had legislators were pulled from the elite. So offering them bribes really didn't have a lot of sway because they were already rich, right? They could get whatever they wanted. That's clearly not the case now, right? But what this points to and how it connects so much for me personally is this counterpoint that's in Lawton in particular, talking about the integrity base being, so much more superior to the compliance base and this high road. I think what it does really well is it demonstrates the need for both, right? You can hope that people are going to buy into the Virginia way, but there really should be some consequences. And the only way you can do that is to make it very explicit. It also points to the disconnect between what I think a lot of times political figures will tell themselves and what the public that they represent actually has to say. So for the deep case study, I looked at the global transformation of Save the Children, and instead of going into detail on that here, I'm just going to pull out a few things that I saw that really paralleled my own view. And this case had to do with wrestling with the need for change over time with competing rationales. You had a large international organization that was dominated by some larger members. The smaller members had their own needs, often were in developing countries, and so approached things very differently. And it was causing problems. And there are these questions of how the various constituencies, their real and or perceived needs within their own context. and how you decide who gets to make the determination. Should you centralize it, distribute it, where it's affecting, the overall? If you have problems in one particular member, it can reverberate for others. And then I saw a lot of parallels here with my own multiple roles that I recognize within myself, particularly influence of my ethical responsibility and how that can influence others. And I see this, with this case of Save the Children, where you have these larger members who felt that because, that their financial piece of it or whatever, that their say should count, and that they were often willing to almost impose their own points of view on the others. This really shifted sort of my ethical threshold of where does the line end, where it's somebody else versus myself. And then thinking about those potential outsized influences. I've said all semester how much I absolutely love teaching freshmen because they're so excited to be here and they're such sponges, but there's an incredible amount of responsibility there because the things that I say may carry much more weight than I ever intended. As I came into the midterm exam assignments, my response to the first question was this was a deeply personal question. It led specifically to my decision to leave the State Department. I was in circumstance, this is where it diverges from those idealized codes that are written that I talked about earlier, where we were actually socialized to ignore some of those elements of those codes, not because we were trying to benefit personally, but because we felt it benefited the mission, that specifically taking on personal actions on behalf of senior level officials, which is explicitly prohibited for federal employees to do that. But we justified it to ourselves because it meant that it gave them space to focus on the really important work. And at the end of the day, that served the public needs. But it came to a head for me when I was at NATO in Brussels, where it was so abusive and so over the top that I became unable to reconcile this conflict with the more normative requirements that were laid out in the code, right? It was clearly socialized. It didn't seem wrong at all because that's what we all did. But what I learned, and this really distilled the main lessons for me from this course, is that there are differences. There are differences between expectations of behavior and the reality. And what that meant for me was that there was inherent variability in my own code. There were things, I'm not ashamed of the work that I did or the things that I did when I was in Brussels, but I look at that situation and how I justified it to myself and how others justified it because it wasn't hidden. It was well known and discussed both at Post and in Washington, and how I wouldn't do that in other aspects of my life. And so that's what I realized, that my inclination to adopt the shared norms of an organization, that is something that is important to me and clearly a key component of my ethical code, but it's also something I need to guard against, because while nominally I was embracing those formal codes of that govern the State Department, in actuality, I was really embracing the informal, sort of unspoken, socialized codes. And that can be dangerous. And I need to be on the guard for that. And then finally, my second question here really focused on this compliance versus integrity approaches. And the key point here to take away, this was for me, the most resonant of the assignments, because it balanced between the idealism and the pragmatism. That's what I see of the compliance versus integrity approaches. As I wrote in my original essay, there are definitely places where you need a compliance approach, and others where emphasizing the integrity approach is probably a better thing. But the idea of an over-reliance on self-governance and shared values, I find very risky. Mitigating risk means that we have to be able to anticipate the gray areas, and the amount of discretion that many public servants are entrusted with means that we can't just assume that we all are on the same page and then we're all going to act properly. So that there is a legitimacy and strength in embracing both approaches. And I keep thinking of this visual of like a slider, right? One of those sort of sliding things where I have a scale, and at one end is integrity and the other is at compliance. And for me, my experience puts the way, it really influences where that slider goes. And that comes down to the role I'm in, or at least the hat that I'm wearing at that moment, as well as what I anticipate the risks or the consequences could be. Does it stop at me, or does it influence the well-being of others? So to conclude all of this, for me, in reviewing all of these assignments, what really stood out was these multiple roles and their influence to my approach to personal ethics. Clearly, I have a deep normative streak, but there is pragmatism that comes from just the reality of working within these different environments. So my conclusion is that I prefer to live and work within established boundaries that are informed by a shared sense of social contract. And at the end of the day, particularly thinking of this from a public sector perspective, it's not about me. My code is to uphold the codes that are agreed by the members of the community. And if a time comes when I no longer can do that, then the responsibility on me is to step away, which is exactly what I've done in my career. And I think with that, I will stop and take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Charity. Great job. So interesting. All of these presentations are so interesting. My question for you is that I think appropriately a tad philosophical. So I would like you to maybe ruminate. I don't expect you to be able to pull a perfectly formed answer out of your head in this moment. But how closely do you think the skepticism that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, how closely is that skepticism connected to the consequentialist perspective that we talked about this semester?
I like to think of it as, it was a term that was introduced to me, ironically enough, when I first came to Virginia Tech in the administrative side, and it was something called professional skepticism. And so it's not a I don't trust as much as an recognition that there's the opportunity for things not to be as they are presented, or for people not to follow along. And so that is how I think of the skepticism. I will refer to it sometimes as cynicism, because I can be a cynical girl, while there's still this idealized piece. But to your question, I think there's the potential of a consequentialist, but I work backwards from it, right? So if we only think about the consequences of the actions, and if I work backwards from that, then I could justify just about anything. And that's what I found myself in the Foreign Service. That's exactly what happened. And when I say we, this was completely socialized. It, you know, in the moment, it made complete sense. Some of the examples I wrote about in my paper are, you know, if the permanent representative, or what we would call the ambassador to NATO, if she is able to focus on that statement she has to deliver this afternoon, because I go and get her son a new cell phone, everybody wins, right? If that's the consequence, right, is that these good things happen for the American people because she can give this statement, then why does it matter that I'm breaking an explicit prohibition? And so I feel like the risk of consequentialism is that we can often justify things to ourselves.
Yeah.
By the way we frame it, the words we use around it, etc.
Yeah, my thought with it, I don't disagree with anything you just said. My thought about it was when you experience stated policies and procedures having a specific goal, and then see them not provide for that, see them break down and not fulfill the reason for which they exist, I can imagine that stokes skepticism.
Absolutely.
Right. So the consequentialist part is, I don't see this producing the results, and so this doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you're right.
And yeah, and so I think they're connected, and maybe a blend of which is what you articulate, a blend of deontologicalism and consequentialism, kind of circularly informing one another.
Yeah,
in that kind
and
of
I
philosophy.
definitely see in these different roles, I tend towards some more than, like, one end more than others, right?
Sure.
So, you know, and I've thought a lot about, particularly as being a professor, particularly of undergraduates. Last semester when I taught at Radford, they didn't know me at all, and they let me create the course. And there was a part of me that thought, are these people crazy? I'm an unknown quantity, and you're just going to let me loose in the classroom to say whatever I want? Right? That was, you know, the responsibility of that, the responsibility of grading fairly, the responsibility of how many opportunities do I mean, that is something I take very seriously. And I certainly wouldn't say that any other professors don't, but there have been times that I've almost not been paralyzed, but I've also been like, am I really ready to be entrusted with that? Right.
Yeah, there's a great responsibility to something like that, right?
Yes.
Not to pull a line from a superhero movie, but
With
you know,
great, with great
yeah.
power comes great responsibility. You're absolutely, it's true. And it's one of those things where I don't know that I would have thought of it. I mean, I think I would have thought of it explicitly with teaching because of the orientations that I have, right? Because I think that there are other people who probably wouldn't have, they would just been like, well, if they hired me, they must think I'm okay, and go forward, right?
Thank you, Charity. Helen has a question, and then we'll progress.
Yeah, Charity, when you talk about the socialization of this deviation from the code and the example you gave, I mean, you know, you said everybody knows about it, and that's kind of like that's Stacy Pomrenke saying this is the way we do it at BVU. And then your example, you know, that somebody goes out and buys a cell phone for this diplomat. So the diplomat, well, that's not what these people are paid to do.
That's not what I was paid to do, but that's, and here's the thing, I was actually sent to basically to do that.
I know, but I guess in both scenarios, BVU and the State Department, the flagrant foul, the deviation from the code is the underlying violation. You know,
it is, and I certainly won't try to defend it. I will say that part of what my sense was, as well as others, was because the State Department did not have control over these ambassadors. Right? They're not, yes, they're State Department employees, but nominally they report to the Secretary of State, but they don't really, right? They're put in place by the president. And as long as the administration wants them in place, there is nothing the State Department can do about it. They can counsel, they can tell them that's not allowed. They all went through training where they were told this wasn't allowed. Didn't matter. She didn't care. And she would shut down operations. She wouldn't do anything except obsessed over the fact that her son lost his cell phone. Literally, she would not go to the meetings that she was required to go to and deliver these statements because she couldn't stop, because she couldn't deal with this. And then there were far more flagrant things. Like I talk about in my paper, like the first thing that I was told when I got there was my job was to fire somebody because she didn't like the way she looked. Right? That kind of stuff. This is not unusual behavior among a certain cadre of particularly ambassadors, appointee ambassadors. And it's an issue that, like a lot of us do, you say to yourself, well, the work's got to get done. How do we get the work done? Right. And so it becomes this, I see it the same way as like when you get assigned to a team project, whether it's in school or professionally, and somebody doesn't do their job. And it's like, do we fail because this person's only going to continue to get pulled along, right? Or do we get the work done, even if it means some of us doing more than we're supposed to, or getting in somebody else's lane? And that's that kind of tension of, in the case of my case at NATO, it was explicitly prohibited. Like I cited in the paper, there is actual language that says they're not allowed to do this. But what do you do when you're faced with the situation? And ultimately I resigned, not specifically because of her. She was kind of the proximal event, but because I realized that personally, this was not an organization I could work within, because that situation wasn't going to go away, right? It was going to continue to be there. I would continue to run into it. And I didn't want to work with in that anymore. I couldn't work in it. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. It was terrible, right? Like I was super stressed. And it was purely an ethical issue for me. That I thought I could justify to myself. And at the end, I was like, why am I justifying this to myself? So, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
I think it provides a really stark example of when individual ethics and organizational ethics collide, right? And when there's a misalignment there, what that can do to individuals varies across the individual, right? And some will say, I can't take this, I can't work like this, and leave. Others will not. And then that becomes a determining factor of, as an organization, who works for you, And it says something about your organization, about that's who works for you, right? So in creating ethical organizations, as we studied this semester, I think that's a really profound realization, is that when other things are deciding who's working for your organization, a misalignment is what's driving that. Is that grounds for change? Is that grounds for maybe Helen's suggestion of more consequences or more enforceable codes that where there are consequences to people's actions? I'll leave it to you all for the philosophical part, but it would seem to be an indicator there. And really great question. And thank you for sharing that, Charity. I know that sometimes that's not easy. Any other questions? We have time for maybe one more. All right. Well, thank you again, Charity. Really great job. We are ready to start our final presentation of the evening. Hampton.
All right. Well, I'm hoping I leave enough time for a good bit of questions because I always love questions. So I'll try to keep mine a little bit shorter, on the shorter end of things. But how's it look for everybody? Looking good? Okay, awesome. So hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. My name is Hampton. I'm gonna go over my ethics portfolio today. So first, before jumping into all the work I've done this semester, I wanted to use some examples of ethical dilemmas in my world, in my career path right now. Is it's a little bit different of a career path from some of you guys in town government, federal government, and state government as well. So as a healthcare recruiter currently for a home health company, I don't want to throw them under the bus just yet, so I'll leave the name out of it for now, but you can make guesses or do a little bit of research and figure it out. So first, I've noticed there's been false promises in hiring practices. This comes into the fact of where you're offering one pay rate, meanwhile, and stating that it could be raised, but it's all up to the state government to do so. While that is true, it gives that false promise in there, and it also defers the blame to others and is used as a recruiting tool to get these individuals that deserve a higher pay rate to come to a company with a lower pay rate. Meanwhile, in the healthcare field, one of the biggest ethical dilemmas is patient confidentiality. It's one of the largest things you see when healthcare companies get in trouble is a violation of confidentiality. And patient confidentiality in the healthcare industry is something that should be taken with the utmost importance. Another thing similar to that of false promises in hiring practices is that of pay rate transparency. Pay rates in my side of the business are, to put it simply, quite atrocious. They, with the way the company's getting paid and the way they're paying the employees, they are not significantly paid at all. They're getting a rate that is terribly low compared to what their job they're currently doing for the business, while the business is making a lot over top. For example, you may pay a nurse $32 an hour. Meanwhile, the client is paying $65 an hour to the business for that service they're getting, whether it's an LPN, RN, CNA, home health aide, or habilitation technician. With that, you need to emphasize that there's more transparency in this when speaking with hiring people as well. Meanwhile, there are also another huge ethical dilemma in my industry is fairness of discharges. Sometimes in facilities, the Medicare rate pays higher than the Medicaid rate. This leads to Medicaid patients being discharged from facilities more often than not to allow more room for Medicare patients to come in for 2 weeks and then allow another Medicare patient to come in, which does in turn boost the overall profit of the facility. However, it puts these people who are in long-term care and found this place a home to be almost homeless and in another facility that may not provide as much care for them. And overall, there needs to be fairness in hiring practices. I've noticed a number of times that, especially recently, that these individuals who are incredibly talented and had all the qualifications were overlooked because managers did not want to take the effort in training them a little bit more, as they had not been in the home health business for a little while. So to dive deeper into that, in my first ethics paper, I wrote about a company that I really, really want to end up with one day, and that I have a dream of ending up with, UNC Health. They're a nonprofit health system that's owned by the state of North Carolina. They have over 15 hospitals, 19 hospital campuses, which are smaller hospitals with a number of doctors' offices around them, also known as regional hospitals, and 900 clinics. They employ over 40,000 employees, and they really want to improve the health and well-being of North Carolinians through providing leadership and excellence in patient care, education, and research in the medical field. So they have a really broad base on what they serve in the state of North Carolina, meanwhile also acting as a state agency so they can improve the public health of North Carolina and their visitors as well. So with that, with them being a hospital and a healthcare system, they follow the American Association Code of Ethics. This originally was established in the 5th century. It was universally adopted by all health systems in 1847, and it has some key principles that are very important of dignity for the patient, professionalism, and privacy, all of which are incredibly important today, no matter what side of the healthcare field you're in. And I really believe that this code of ethics should be followed to the book in the healthcare industry, as it provides both safety for the patients, fairness in practices, as well as fairness in treatment as well. Meanwhile, in ethics paper 2, similar to my hiring practices earlier, I looked over the spoils system, which was established by Andrew Jackson and then eventually replaced by the merit system here in 1883. I believe that the merit system is incredibly important when hiring individuals in your organization, as it allows you to have these fair hiring practices and hire those most talented individuals that are very deserving of the job. And with this spoils system, there was a number of issues that arose that could definitely potentially arise today. Most importantly being the embezzlement. As you can see here on the right side, you have a little cartoon there of the New York tax customs agent that embezzled well over $1 million, which equated to about $100 million in today's money then, which was, I believe, 2.3% of the US economy at the time, ran off to England, ended up forfeiting some property, but it was not worth the money that he stole, and ended up being able to come back to the States after a while as well. Another huge thing with the spoils system is mismanagement. Currently, the business I am at is very mismanaged. There's quite a number of shortages due to people leaving, people being run off, and people being fired as well. It's led to the job for a number of individuals running into it, and they run into a number of issues as well with being short-staffed, being run dry, and overall burnt out. Finally, it leads to the skillful people being denied. Skillful people in these industries are incredibly important. You're only as important as the person working for you that is more talented than you are. And I believe that a healthy organization practices the merit system. With that being said, a big factor of this semester has been to try to develop a theory on ethics. I know I've kind of toyed with it a little bit in our discussions, but I believe ethics are based on the person. Ethics and morals are established at a young age, and they're also built upon over time through classes like this and through life experiences as well. And I also believe that individual ethics affect an entire organization. For example, the one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. I believe that the actions of one individual can definitely make an organization have a bad look and an ethical dilemma as well. I also believe that leaders must lead by example. In order to lead by example, you need to show that through actions and through ethical decisions as well. A leader by example is not only a good leader, it also proves that point to those that they're managing that this is how things should be done, and it allows for the utmost respect and accountability in their work. And also, I've also noticed that every dilemma is unique. You know, there's various approaches and perspectives that should be used when approaching an ethical dilemma. So for my ethics approach, I believe you should lead by example. You should also promote strong ethical decision-making from within. This should involve trainings. It also should involve establishing those good ethics from the very start, from the interview. And it also should reward these ethics as well. If someone makes a good ethical decision within a dilemma, you should make sure you reward them, whether that's a lunch, bonus, whatever it may be. You need to make sure it's rewarded and recognized as well. You should also understand that every perspective is different. One person may have a perspective of an ethical decision that, that stealing $1 is okay. Meanwhile, another person may think that stealing $1 is the worst thing possible, which stealing is bad. So I would side with the latter of the two. Meanwhile, you should also embrace and reward ethical decision making. As I said earlier, I mean, it's a huge process of making sure that you have ethical decision making, especially in a large organization where you can't always make a relationship with everyone there that you're managing. You need to make sure that your other managers as well are able to do this and able to make these relationships and understand that ethics are truly important. And being able to handle every dilemma in a manner that best fits that dilemma. That's a huge aspect as well, as you don't want to mismanage an ethical dilemma and end up leading to an even bigger ethical dilemma in that situation, or something that where you may fix it at the time, put a Band-Aid on it, it ends up getting better, it ends up getting worse over time. So with that, leaves me with my personal ethics statement. I'm going to strive to promote transparent, responsible practices in all organizations I'm a part of. By leading by example, I'll also feel reassured that I'm promoting and teaching ethical behaviors to others as well. Most importantly, you need to show respect, embrace integrity, and always remain honest. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a nice day or night.
Thank you, Hampton. Really great job. I have a question for you, similar to Charity. I'm not expecting you to create a perfectly formed answer out of this impromptu question in the moment, but it's something to think about, and I think you'll probably be able to at least pontificate a little bit on the possibilities. I want you to think about your examples that you provided on the first slide at the beginning of your presentation. How do those examples and your experience inform what kind of manager you want to be?
Of course, yeah. And that's I thought I had an answer at first, but now I'm gonna have to think about it for a second. I mean, definitely, it really shaped my personal ethics statement, especially the point of honesty and respect. I mean, that's a huge thing to me right now. I'll be fully transparent. I recently went for a promotion for the kind of field support and HR position. And I thought I had a pretty good answer on it. Turns out I got the exact same answer someone else did for a different position, and they were in similar shoes as me as well. And it helped me realize that I can't really with these ethical dilemmas I'm seeing as well. I thought it only affected one group. Turns out it also affects internal operations as well. And I believe with that, you need to remain constant throughout. You need to remain ethically informed on all parties, whether it's an external stakeholder or an internal stakeholder. And overall, I mean, it's as simple as, really made my decision in my statement be more towards really focusing on honesty in my leadership, as well as leading by example. Nothing would be below me, making sure that I'm involved in all ethical decisions and really, really rewarding and promoting that honesty, integrity, and respect.
So what I'm hearing when you talk about honesty, are there situations in management where honesty is not the same as full transparency?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely think so. There can be situations at times where, I don't know, for example, say you're the CEO and you're hiring a new VP of operations and you have your administrator asking about that. You have a few administrators asking about that, but it's still under wraps. You can't necessarily say who that is just yet because there's a number of different details still working around, NDAs as well and everything. And I mean, I believe, at that point, you're not being transparent in the moment, but at the same time, you could still be honest and say that there is someone, You just can't be as transparent on who exactly that person is.
So what I hear from your answer is, and from your slides, it was throughout your slides, is that you are a person who strives to lead by example in all things.
Of course.
If you're going to lead, if you're going to be put in a leadership position, you even talked about, there's nothing you won't do, right? It's the I'm never afraid to get my hands dirty philosophy. I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't be willing to do myself, in other words. So my last question for you on that front is, what are the ethical implications of leading by example?
Of course.
Are there considerations ethically for leading by example?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you need to make sure that you're licensed to do said work. Say, for example, I'm at a skilled nursing facility. I mean, I can't go feed a G-tube or, pass medications. I mean, that's, definitely you need to make sure first that you're licensed to do so, you're trained to do so. Also, the ethical implication is that you need to make sure you're giving everyone the adequate amount of time. You can't focus on one person solely because you think they have more interesting job than others. You got to make sure that you split that time up, whether it's, for example, from this summer, my internship, say I spent a week at admissions and rehab. I mean, that was fun, fantastic time. Meanwhile, I may have not enjoyed at the same time sitting in the discharge office all the time, really kind of twiddling my thumbs, waiting for people to call us back, or being on the roof of the facility in 95-degree heat, just about dying of a heat stroke. But overall, you need to make sure first that you're not only legally, but also licensed and trained to do it. You don't want to make a mistake there further or make an uninformed decision that may, lead to bigger consequences in the end. But you also need to make sure that you do this with fairness, that you're not prying on one certain issue or one certain idea at a time, which is a very fine line to deal on, because you may have some departments that may have bigger issues than others that need more time, but you need to make sure that you're still focusing on every single aspect of that facility, that business, that health system or organization fairly.
Thank you, Hampton. I'm going to open up the questions to the rest of the class.
Well, I don't have a question. I just, in listening to Hampton and your question to him, it goes back to what Angie was telling us of, starting out and somebody took what she'd done and used it for their advancement. It's like, okay, so there's no perfect situation. I mean, Hampton has delineated a lot of problems with this situation, but I think in both situations, you've got Angie, who was obviously ethical, and you've got Hampton, who is now, and what contribution did Angie make throughout the 21 years? Obviously a lot. And Hampton has the potential to make it either there or somewhere else. I just see a lot of, she's giving us the back, through the rear view mirror, and he's looking ahead.
So interesting, Helen, and I agree with you. And it's really quite inspiring for me to listen to this. All of the organizations that you all have worked with are made better by you all being there, from what I'm hearing in these presentations tonight. Hampton, in particular, on your presentation, your organization is improved by your presence there.
Thank you.
And so don't lose heart, and keep being that manager that you want to be. They always say dress for the job you want, not the one you have. That applies to behavior, management, ethics, everything else too, right?
And trust, it's not just me. There's a few, there's a quiet majority there. It's just, we're working on it.
You're working on it. Let's leave it there. I think that's a really, really great place to leave it. Thank you very much, Hampton. Again, really appreciate your presentation. I'm going to end the recording.